Okay, today we're diving into a pretty controversial idea about a disease that affects millions of people. We're going to break down, slide by slide, an argument from a functional medicine expert. And just around the same page, functional medicine is an approach that's all about finding the root cause of an illness. This expert claims that diabetes isn't a life sentence at all, but a completely curable condition. Let's get right into it.
So right off the bat, the source material we're digging into today hits you with this huge question. I mean, this just completely challenges the conventional wisdom that says diabetes is something you just have to manage for the rest of your life, not something you can actually cure.
All right, so before we go any further, I just want to be super clear. Our goal here is to explain this specific viewpoint, exactly as it's presented in the source. We're just deconstructing the argument to understand its logic. We're not here to endorse it or say if it's right or wrong. We're simply laying out the case that it makes, piece by piece.
So, the whole argument really hinges on this one massive idea, shifting from just managing diabetes to actually seeking a complete cure. Let's see how they present this.
Now, check out the language here. This is what's so interesting. The source doesn't just suggest, hey, maybe there's another way. Nope, it uses the phrase blatant lie. That's some really strong wording, right? It immediately sets this very confrontational tone, basically positioning its own argument as some kind of inconvenient truth fighting against the establishment.
So, if the common advice is a lie, then where exactly does conventional wisdom go wrong? Well, according to this source, the flaw is right at the very foundation of how we treat diabetes today.
In this table, just lays it all out crystal clear. On one side, you have mainstream medicine, which, according to this view, focuses on managing the symptom. That's the high blood sugar. It's seen as a temporary fix, like putting a Band-Aid on the problem. But on the other side, you have this functional medicine approach, which says, forget the symptom, let's find the root cause and pull it out. And that, it claims, is the only path to a real cure.
To really drive this point home, the source uses this really powerful metaphor. It argues that using insulin medication when someone is already insulin resistant is like trying to shove more people onto a subway that's already completely packed. Let's unpack what that actually means.
So picture this. Your body cells, they're the subway car. And in this scenario, they are stuffed with sugar, totally full. So what does insulin medication do? According to this analogy, it acts like a forceful pushman, literally cramming even more sugar into those cells that can't take any more. The source argues this doesn't solve a thing. It just ends up damaging the cells, exhausting the pancreas, and making all the underlying inflammation even worse. Okay, so we've heard the critique of the treatment, but what does the source say is the actual root cause of the problem in the first place? Well, it all comes down to something it calls an evolutionary mismatch. This timeline is pretty much the heart of the entire argument. Think about it. For 3 million years, our bodies supposedly evolved to run on proteins and fats. That's what we were built for. Then suddenly, about 10,000 years ago, which is literally a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, the agricultural revolution introduces massive amounts of carbs into our diet. The argument is that our bodies, our genetics, just haven't had time to adapt to this new fuel source. So, from this viewpoint, carbohydrates are basically seen as a poison to the modern body. The source argues they break down into sugar, which leads to chronic inflammation and just constantly stimulates insulin. And this constant poking of the insulin system over and over again is what it claims leads directly to insulin resistance and eventually to diabetes. Okay, so if the argument is that a specific food group is the cause of the problem, well, the proposed solution is pretty direct, right? Remove that cause to get what the source calls a cure.
And there it is. The logic is presented as brutally simple. If excess sugar from carbohydrates is the problem, the solution is to just stop eating it.
So, what does that mean in practice? The source calls for getting rid of all the obvious sugars, of course, but also all the carbohydrates that convert to sugar. So we're talking rice, bread, noodles, the whole shebang. It also points the finger at sweet fruits and alcohol as major contributors.
So, what do you eat instead? Well, the recommendation is to go back to an ancestral way of eating, focusing on high-quality fats and proteins, along with a lot of fiber-rich vegetables. The whole point is to shift your body's primary fuel source away from sugar and back to fat. So, what does this cure actually look like? According to the source, it's about reactivating your body's own ability to heal. The idea is that once you remove the dietary cause, your insulin levels stabilize, inflammation goes away, and your blood sugar just returns to normal all on its own, making medication totally unnecessary. That is the promised outcome.
But this brings us to a huge, critical question, right? If this solution is so simple and effective, why isn't it standard practice? Why isn't every doctor recommending this? Well, the source provides a pretty cynical economic answer.
And this is basically the punchline of the source's entire argument. It claims this dietary solution has a fatal flaw, but only from a commercial point of view. It's free. It doesn't require a prescription you can sell, or a procedure, or any kind of product.
You can see the massive conflict of interest they're pointing to here. The source argues that the pharmaceutical industry's business model profits from creating lifelong customers who manage a chronic disease with medication. But a dietary cure, that creates healthy individuals who don't need to be customers anymore. From that perspective, there's just no financial incentive to promote a cure that doesn't make any money. And that wraps up our breakdown of this functional medicine argument, which completely reframes diabetes as a curable, diet-caused condition. It leaves us all with a pretty challenging question to chew on. When it comes to our health, what is the right balance between established medical practices and these provocative alternative viewpoints?